Deep in the heart of the Amazon rainforest, there is a dish surrounded by stories, tradition, and even a certain sense of fear. A food so complex that it must remain boiling over fire for 7 entire days before it becomes safe for human consumption. A dish born from the ancestral knowledge of the indigenous peoples of the Amazon, shaped through the colonial period, enriched by African and Portuguese influences, and which centuries later still holds a central place in the culture of northern Brazil. This is the story of maniçoba. At first glance, it may seem like nothing more than a dark stew served in massive pots during celebrations and family gatherings. But behind its simple appearance lies an astonishing culinary process, almost alchemical in nature, capable of transforming a naturally poisonous plant into one of the greatest delicacies of Amazonian cuisine. For centuries, maniçoba has carried knowledge, passed down from generation to generation. Indigenous survival techniques, empirical experimentation with toxic plants, adaptations created by enslaved Black communities in colonial kitchens, and family traditions that remain alive to this day. More than just a recipe, maniçoba is a portrait of the cultural formation of the Amazon itself. And perhaps the most fascinating part of this story is the fact that everything begins with leaves capable of producing a toxic compound potentially lethal to humans. Stay until the end and tell me, would you dare to eat this dish? In northern Brazil, especially in the state of Pará, maniçoba is a traditional dish made from maniva leaves and consumed daily by many families. It has a strong presence in the capital city, Belém, as well as in several towns throughout the countryside of Pará, and is especially traditional during the festivities of the Círio de Nazaré. Although it is also found in parts of Amazonas and Amapá, it was in Pará that maniçoba became established as a true cultural symbol. The preparation begins with maniva, the leaves of wild cassava. These leaves go through an intense grinding process designed to completely break down their plant fibers. This detail is important because, once crushed, the plant cells release natural chemical compounds known as cyanogenic glycosides, mainly linamarin. When these substances come into contact with the plant's own natural enzymes, a chemical reaction occurs that produces hydrocyanic acid, also known as hydrogen cyanide, an extremely toxic compound for the human body. Chemically, hydrocyanic acid, represented by the formula HCN, is a highly volatile liquid or gas. Its danger lies in the fact that it directly interferes with cellular respiration. Instead of preventing oxygen from entering the lungs, it blocks the cell's ability to use oxygen to produce energy. In severe cases of poisoning, the body literally loses its ability to carry out essential survival processes. That is exactly why maniva cannot be consumed raw. After grinding, the most famous stage of maniçoba preparation begins: 7 continuous days of boiling. During this period, the mixture remains under constant heat and must be stirred repeatedly to prevent it from sticking to the bottom of the pot. The 7 days of cooking did not emerge as a random number. They represent the result of centuries of practical observation and refinement of Amazonian culinary techniques. Over time, people realized that short cooking periods still preserved part of the plant's toxicity, while prolonged boiling made the preparation safe. What happens in that pot is almost a controlled chemical transformation. Hydrocyanic acid has an extremely low evaporation point, around 26 degrees Celsius. This means that under high temperatures, it gradually evaporates, along with the steam released from the pot. Over days of continuous boiling, the toxic compound is slowly eliminated until it reaches safe levels for human consumption. Beyond evaporation, intense heat also alters other chemical structures within the plant, changes flavors, reduces bitterness, and completely transforms the texture of the maniva. The result of this long process is what many researchers describe as a true culinary alchemy, a naturally poisonous plant being transformed through heat, time, and traditional knowledge into a safe, nutritious, and culturally sacred food for the Amazon. And it is at this moment that the ingredients responsible for shaping modern Manisoba begin to appear. Salted meats, pork cuts, dried beef, bacon, and sausages, slowly added into the dark maniva broth and transforming the dish into one of the most remarkable preparations in Brazilian cuisine. The origin of Manisoba combines indigenous heritage, adaptation to the Amazon environment, and African and colonial influences. Long before Europeans arrived in the Amazon, indigenous peoples of the region had already mastered sophisticated techniques for processing wild cassava. This knowledge was essential for survival, since cassava was abundant, resistant to the Amazonian climate, and extremely nutritious despite being naturally toxic. The first written records made by Europeans about the consumption of cassava derivatives in the Amazon appeared between the 16th and 17th centuries, when Portuguese explorers, missionaries, and chroniclers began describing indigenous eating habits. Many of these reports expressed astonishment at the ability of Amazonian peoples to transform a poisonous plant into safe food. But this knowledge did not appear overnight. It was built over countless generations through observation, experimentation, trial and error, and the gradual refinement of culinary techniques. There are oral accounts and ethnographic records indicating that substances extracted from wild cassava were used in hunting and fishing. Indigenous peoples used arrows coated with compounds derived from the plant and also released part of the toxic liquid into small rivers and streams to stun fish and make them easier to catch. From these experiences, indigenous communities realized something fundamental. Heat changed the behavior of the poison. Preparations boiled for long periods caused fewer cases of intoxication. Liquids left over the fire for longer lost part of their toxicity. Little by little, this knowledge was refined until safe methods of preparing maniva were established. There is also a well-known popular story in the Amazon region, claiming that village elders would taste certain preparations before the rest of the community to determine whether they were already safe to eat. However, although this narrative is part of the popular imagination surrounding Manisoba, there are no solid historical records proving that this practice systematically occurred. Even so, the story helps illustrate how indigenous food knowledge was built through direct experience and careful observation of the plant's effects on the human body. Even without understanding modern concepts such as HCN, enzymes, or cyanogenic glycosides, indigenous peoples fully understood the practical effects of wild cassava. If a preparation caused poisoning, it was avoided. If a method proved safe, it was repeated, transmitted, and improved across generations. The earliest indigenous version of Manisoba was very different from the one known today. It likely resembled a thick maniva broth without the enormous variety of meats now associated with the dish. The transformation of Manisoba into a rich meat stew happened mainly during the colonial period, through the strong African influence in Brazilian kitchens. Inside plantations, sugar mills, and large colonial estates, enslaved Black people played a central role in food preparation. They began combining indigenous ingredients with African and Portuguese techniques of slow cooking, salt preservation, and full use of available ingredients. Many of the pork cuts added to maniçoba during the colonial period were precisely the less valued cuts rejected by the elites of the time. Pig ears, feet, salted ribs, pork fat, and other so-called inferior cuts were frequently reserved for enslaved populations. Yet these communities developed highly creative ways to transform simple ingredients into nutritious and flavorful meals. As these meats were slowly incorporated into the maniva broth during long hours of cooking, they enriched both the flavor and structure of maniçoba. It was from this fusion of indigenous knowledge, African culinary techniques, and Portuguese food traditions that the modern version of the dish was born. For this reason, some people refer to maniçoba as the Amazonian feijoada. Even so, it possesses its own identity, its own history, and a cultural significance far deeper than a simple culinary comparison. Today, maniçoba is considered one of the greatest cultural symbols of Pará and the Amazon region. More than just food, it represents memory, ancestry, and cultural resistance. During the period of the Tirio de Nazaré in Belém, enormous pots of maniçoba begin cooking days before the celebrations. Entire families gather to monitor the cooking process, divide responsibilities, and keep alive a tradition passed down from generation to generation. In many households across Pará, preparing maniçoba is not simply cooking, it is preserving the history of the family itself. And perhaps that is exactly what makes this dish so fascinating. Its ability to carry within a single pot centuries of empirical science, indigenous survival, African resistance, and Amazonian identity. So then, would you dare to try this delicacy?